Pregnant, abandoned, and accused of a crime she never committed, Elena lost everything in one night. But when the world expected her to disappear, she rose from heartbreak with the truth in her hands. This story teaches us that betrayal may break the heart, but courage can rebuild a life. Please support our channel with one like and one share for more powerful stories. Thanks for watching.
The phone rang 3 times. My husband saw my name on the screen and hit decline. He had no idea I was in the back of a car, bleeding. I was 8 months pregnant with twins, alone and terrified in a Manhattan storm. He didn't know that while he was celebrating a $2 billion deal, doctors were telling me they might have to choose between saving me or our babies. He found out 14 hours later, and when he finally showed up, he said I should have called an ambulance instead of being dramatic. Dramatic. I almost died. Our babies almost died. And he called me dramatic. But the part that shattered me? I found emails on his computer between him and his mother, sent before we were even married. They called me the incubator. They planned on replacing me before I even said I do. 3 months later, he sent the police to take my children. He forged medical records, paid off judges, and destroyed my name. He expected me to fall apart, but he forgot one very important detail about me. Before I was his wife, before I was a mother, before I was the woman he tried to break, I was a forensic accountant. And what do forensic accountants do? We find the secrets powerful men try to bury. This is the story of how I lost everything: my babies, my money, my reputation, my name. It is also the story of how I burned his entire empire to the ground. But I have to warn you, there is a twist at the end that I never saw coming. A secret that changes everything. So stick around, because this ending will shock you. My name is Elena Shaw, and this is how I got my life back. The phone vibrated 3 times on the mahogany table, the screen flashing a single name: Elena. Daniel Shaw's jaw clenched. His finger hovered for just a second before pressing the red decline button. He had no idea that was the last time his wife would try to call him before their world fell apart. He didn't know that while he was closing a $2 billion deal, his pregnant wife was bleeding in a car, utterly alone and afraid. He thought he was building an empire, but instead, he was about to hand his entire world to the one man he despised most. This is the story of a CEO who lost it all in a single moment of silence, and how his wife found everything he never gave her. The rain falling on Manhattan that Tuesday wasn't just rain. It was a biblical flood, turning the city into a wash of gray steel. But inside the climate-controlled boardroom of Shaw Industries, the storm didn't exist. The only pressure in that room was Daniel Shaw. At 36, Daniel was the youngest titan in tech logistics. He had a sharp jaw, a perfectly tailored charcoal coal suit, and eyes that could strip a man of his confidence in seconds. Today, he was hunting. "This valuation is wrong," Daniel said, his voice quiet but sharp. He didn't even look at the paperwork. He stared right at the trembling CEO of the company he was about to buy. "You're hemorrhaging money in your Europe-Asia division. If I leave, Kalinowski Global will eat you for lunch. And we both know Roman Kalinowski doesn't do mergers, he performs annihilations." The name Roman Kalinowski made everyone in the room tense up. Kalinowski was the ghost that haunted Daniel. Daniel was aggressive new money. Roman was unpredictable old money. They had been bitter rivals since business school at Wharton, a fight that had spilled onto the stock exchange. Daniel's phone lit up again. It read, "Incoming call, Elena," with a little heart emoji. He glanced at the screen for a split second, his jaw tightening with annoyance. Elena was 8 months pregnant with twins, on strict bed rest at their estate in Greenwich. She had no business calling him during the most critical meeting of the quarter. He let it ring. "Daniel, maybe you should answer that," his lawyer, Arthur Whitmore, whispered. Arthur was one of the few people who knew Elena's pregnancy was high risk. "We're closing," Daniel hissed. His eyes locked on the opposing CFO. Elena knows my schedule. She's probably calling about paint colors for the nursery. It can wait. But it couldn't. 5 miles away, Elena Shaw was not in Greenwich. She was in a black town car, clutching her stomach, fighting for every breath. She was ghost white, covered in a cold sweat, her dark hair stuck to her forehead. "Driver, please," she gasped, as pain shot through her body like a white-hot poker. "How much longer?" "The traffic's a parking lot, Mrs. Shaw." "It's the storm," the driver said, his panicked eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "I'll try for Mount Sinai, but we are not going anywhere." Elena looked down at her phone. Call declined. Tears burned her eyes. She wasn't calling about paint. She was calling because she felt something tear deep inside her. She was calling because she'd broken her doctor's orders for a reason Daniel would never imagine. She had discovered the financial reports on Daniel's private server. She knew he was risking everything just to crush Roman Kalinowski, and that if this deal failed, he'd face a federal investigation. She was on her way to Roman's office to beg for a truce, to plead with him to back out of the bidding war for her husband's sake. It was a stupid, desperate move, fueled by a love Daniel no longer deserved. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her college roommate. "Jessica Torres, is your mother-in-law visiting? Need me to fake an emergency? I do a great 'your car is on fire' voice." For a second, Elena almost smiled, but then another contraction hit so hard the world went white. The driver yanked the car toward the curb. "Ma'am, we have to get you to a hospital now." Elena just nodded. But even then, she looked at her phone one last time. Call declined. She had ignored the red flags for years. The forgotten anniversaries, the phone always screened down, the passwords he changed every month. When your gut whispers, you are supposed to pay attention. Hers had been screaming for years, and she had just ignored it. Now, alone in a car in a Manhattan storm, 8 months pregnant with twins who might not live another hour, Elena Shaw finally got it. She was completely alone. She had always been alone. And if she wanted to survive this, she had to stop waiting for her husband to rescue her. The car lurched to a stop in front of an emergency entrance. It was not Mount Sinai. It was not the private hospital with her perfect delivery plan. It was a county hospital with buzzing fluorescent lights and a waiting room full of strangers. But it was close, and close was all that mattered. The driver helped her out. A nurse saw her immediately, took one look at the blood on the floor by her feet, and screamed for a gurney. "Ma'am," the nurse asked, "are you by yourself? Where is the father?" Elena looked at her phone one last time. 3 missed calls. No reply. "He's in a meeting," Elena whispered as they wheeled her away. "He is always in a meeting." The last thing she saw before the double doors swung shut was her phone screen. "Daniel Shaw has declined your call." And across the city, in a shining boardroom, her husband was opening a bottle of champagne. He had won his deal. He had no idea what he'd just thrown away. The emergency room was pure chaos. Lights buzzed overhead, a baby was wailing, and the air smelled like disinfectant and burned coffee. Elena hardly even noticed. The pain was a living creature now, a monster with claws tearing her apart from the inside. She gripped the metal gurney rails until her knuckles were bone white. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" A young nurse ran alongside her, holding a clipboard. She had kind eyes and a calm voice. "Elena Shaw," she said through gritted teeth. "Elena Mercer Shaw." "Okay, Elena. I need an emergency contact. Who can we call for you?" "My husband, Daniel Shaw. His number is in my phone." The nurse took the phone from Elena's shaking hand and dialed the number. It rang and rang. No one picked up. She tried a second time. Nothing. "Elena. Is there anyone else we can try to call?" Elena squeezed her eyes shut. The contractions were hitting one after another now, waves of pure agony that stole her breath. She thought of her mother, gone 3 years. Her father, who hadn't spoken to her since she married Daniel. Her sister, all the way in California. There was only one other person. Jessica Torres, Elena whispered. She's on speed dial too. She's my lawyer, my friend. She'll come. The nurse dialed. This time a voice answered on the very first ring. What's wrong? Is Elena okay? I'm getting in the car this second. Jessica's voice was so loud Elena could hear it. Just tell me where. County General, the nurse replied. Maternity ER. How soon can you be here? 40 minutes. Maybe 30 if I break a few traffic laws. Tell her I'm on my way. Tell her she is not alone. The nurse hung up and gave Elena's hand a squeeze. Help is on the way, she said. Now let's get you to delivery. But as they rushed her toward the operating room, Elena's phone buzzed one more time. It wasn't a call. It was a social media alert from Daniel's company. Shaw Industries secures a landmark $2 billion acquisition. The photo showed Daniel, beaming, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by smiling executives. And right there, at the very edge of the picture, was a woman with perfect blonde hair and bright red lipstick. Her hand was resting on Daniel's arm, just a little too comfortably. Victoria Lane, his executive assistant. Elena just stared at the picture as the gurney clattered through the doors. She stared at the way Victoria was looking at her husband. She stared at how Daniel wasn't looking at his phone. And something deep inside her, something that had been holding on by a single thread for years, finally snapped. The delivery was brutal, an emergency C-section. The twins were too early, too small, incredibly fragile. Lucas came out first, silent for 30 terrifying seconds before letting out a cry. Then came Lily, even smaller, her skin a frightening shade of blue. Through a haze of drugs and terror, Elena watched the doctors frantically work on her babies. She couldn't move or speak. All she could do was lie there and pray to a God she wasn't even sure existed. The twins survived, but barely. They were rushed to the neonatal unit, hooked up to a tangle of machines, their tiny chests fighting for every breath. Elena survived too, but just barely. She'd lost a dangerous amount of blood, and her pressure skyrocketed. The doctors kept saying things like lucky and a miracle. But Elena did not feel lucky. She just felt utterly alone. She woke up 14 hours later in a cold, private room. Her throat was raw. Her body felt like one giant bruise. And the person sitting in the chair beside her bed holding her hand was not her husband. It was her best friend, Jessica Torres. "Hey you," Jess said softly. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was solid. "Welcome back to the world. The babies?" Elena's voice was a croak. "They're little fighters, just like their mom." Jess squeezed her hand gently. "They're in the NICU, but they're stable. The doctors think they're going to be okay." Elena finally let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. "And Daniel?" Jess's expression shifted. A shadow passed over her eyes before she could hide it. "He's here," she said, picking her words with care. "He arrived about an hour ago." 14 hours, Elena whispered. "It took him 14 hours to get here." "Elena, listen. There's something you have to know before you see him." But before Jess could say another word, the door swung open. Daniel Shaw strode in as if he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. He owned everything. He was in a fresh, perfectly pressed suit, without a single wrinkle to suggest he'd been pacing in a waiting room or crying in a hospital chapel. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a board meeting, and Elena realized with a sickening twist in her gut that he probably had. "Elena," Daniel said, his voice sharp, almost irritated. "You should have called an ambulance instead of driving into the city. What were you thinking?" "I did call," Elena said quietly. "I called you. 3 times. You rejected every call." Daniel's jaw clenched. "I was in the middle of closing the biggest deal of my career. You knew how important that was. I was dying, Daniel. Our babies were dying." "But you didn't," he said, as if that closed the matter. "And the babies are fine. The doctor told me so. Let's not be overly dramatic here." Elena stared at the man she had married, the man she'd sacrificed her career for, the man whose children she had just nearly died giving birth to, and she realized with a strange, chilling calm that she didn't know him at all. "I know about Victoria," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel froze. For a split second, his face was a blank slate before the cold mask snapped back into place. "You've been going through my things?" It wasn't a denial. There was no apology. It was pure anger at being caught. "I saw the photograph, Daniel, from your big celebration. She was standing right beside you, her hand on your arm, while I was bleeding on an operating table." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, detached, like he was delivering a bad quarterly report. "Elena, let's be adults about this. You were a means to an end. The house, the credit cards, the lifestyle. Consider that my gift to you. Victoria understands my world. You understand how to make casseroles." Elena felt the sting of his words like a slap. "We'll divorce as soon as you recover," Daniel continued. "You can have visitation, but the twins will stay with me. The Shaws do not split custody. You can't do that to me. Watch me." He straightened his tie. "I have lawyers you couldn't afford to even speak to. I have judges in my pocket. You can try to fight this, Elena, but I promise you, you will lose. You'll lose the children, you'll lose the money, and you will lose any dignity you have left." He walked to the door, then paused to look back at her. "Get some rest. You look awful." Then the door clicked shut, leaving her in silence. Elena sat alone in that sterile hospital bed. Her body was broken, her heart was in pieces, and her babies were fighting for their lives just down the hall. She thought about everything Daniel had just said about casseroles, about being a stepping stone, about losing. And for the very first time in her marriage, she didn't cry. You see, Daniel was convinced he had already won. He saw her as weak, helpless, and completely defeated. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. Before she was his wife, before she was a mother, before she became the person he tried to mold her into, Elena, Mercer, had been one of the top forensic accountants in all of New York City. And forensic accountants have a special skill for finding things, hidden things, secret things, things that powerful men assume are buried forever. "Jess," Elena said softly, "I need you to do something for me." Jess leaned in closer. "Anything. I need you to help me absolutely destroy him." A slow smile spread across Jess's face, a fierce, protective, brilliant smile. "Honey, I didn't suffer through law school to watch my best friend cry. I did it to make men like him cry. Now, you tell me everything." And so, in that quiet hospital room, Elena did. 6 weeks after she nearly died, Elena Shaw walked back into a house that didn't feel like her home anymore. The Greenwich mansion was exactly as she'd left it, 14,000 square feet of cold marble and expensive furniture. The nursery was painted in the soft yellow she had chosen herself. The walk-in closet was filled with clothes Daniel had to personally approve before she was allowed to buy them. She never realized before just how much of her life required his permission. And ladies, let me tell you something I wish I had known years ago. When you need permission to buy your own clothes, or to see your own friends, or just to breathe your own air, that is not a marriage. That is a cage with a diamond ring on the door. Came home 3 weeks after they were born, still tiny, but finally healthy. Lucas had his father's dark hair and a stubborn little jaw. Lily had Elena's eyes, brown and observant, taking in everything with a seriousness that seemed too big for a baby. Elena held them every single chance she got. She fed them at 2 in the morning, and 4 in the morning, and 6 in the morning. She sang them the same old lullabies her own mother used to sing to her before she passed away. She memorized the feeling of their weight in her arms, the soft rhythm of their breathing, the way Lucas's tiny fist would clench while he was dreaming. She did this because she knew Daniel would try to take them from her. and she knew she would burn the entire world down before she ever let that happen. During the day, while Daniel was at his office and a nanny helped with the babies, Elena began her own secret investigation. She was methodical, careful, and incredibly patient. She screenshotted every single email she could access. She photographed every receipt she found in his coat pockets. She recorded every phone call when he thought no one was listening. New York is a one-party consent state, she had checked. And I'm telling you now, write that down. One-party consent. Look up the laws where you live, because a conversation you record today might just be the evidence that saves you tomorrow. Slowly, piece by painful piece, she started to assemble a picture of her husband's secret life. The affair with Victoria had been going on for 2 years. There were hotel bills from times Elena believed Daniel was away at conferences, receipts for jewelry that she had certainly never received. And then there were the text messages that made her feel sick to her stomach. In the texts, he called Victoria my real wife and Elena the incubator. The incubator. That S all she was to him, a container for his children, nothing more. But the affair wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what she found on his private server. Jess just stared at the laptop. Her jaw dropped. Elena, this is $47 million. $47 million. Hidden in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts he never mentioned in your prenup or on your taxes. Elena just nodded. She'd spent 3 straight nights with no sleep, just tracing the money. She was running on nothing but coffee and pure fury. I found the access code. It's in his home office, taped to the bottom of his desk drawer. He never thought I'd find them because he thinks I'm too dumb to figure out finances. Jess let out a low whistle. Honey, this is way bigger than a divorce. This is tax fraud, money laundering. Who knows what else? There's more, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. She clicked open another file, her hand shaking as she moved the mouse. This was the part that still made her stomach turn. It was a series of emails between Daniel and his mother, Margaret Shaw. The messages went back almost 3 years, to before Elena and Daniel were even married. Jess began to read them out loud, her voice growing harder and colder with every sentence. Victoria is a perfect match. Ambitious, but she can be controlled. Her breeding is far superior to that Mercer girl's. She looked up from the screen. Did your mother-in-law just compare you to a farm animal? Just keep reading. Once Elena has served her purpose, we can make arrangements for Daniel to move on. Victoria will provide the family with heirs from a proper bloodline. The Mercer girl can be easily paid off. She has no family connections that matter. Her mother is gone. Her father is a drunk. No one is going to fight for her. Jess finally lowered the laptop, her own hands shaking now. Your mother-in-law was planning to replace you before you even had your wedding. Before my wedding, Elena repeated quietly, and Daniel was in on it the entire time. So every kiss, every "I love you," every time he held my hand at some dinner party, it was all just an act. I was just auditioning for a part that I had already lost. They sat in silence for a long moment, staring out the window of Jess's small apartment as the city lights began to blur. The Manhattan sunset was bleeding orange light across her floor. It reminded Elena of her wedding day. The dress, the vows, how Daniel looked at her, promising forever. He was already planning to destroy her, even then. So, what's our move? Elena finally asked. Her lawyer Jess leaned back, still in the Navy power suit she wore to court, the kind that said she could sue God and win. We have 3 choices, Jess said. First, we file for divorce immediately. We go after him with everything we have got, and just pray we find a decent judge before his army of lawyers buries us alive. Elena asked, and the risk? He has deeper pockets, better connections, and all the time in the world. He will drag this out for years. Your kids will be teenagers by the time it is over, and he will have spent every day telling them their mother is insane. What is option 2? We turn him in to the government. The secret bank accounts, the tax evasion, all of it. Let them handle him. Elena's face tightened. But then I have no say, and if he is charged, all our money gets frozen. I could lose everything. The children could lose everything, precisely, which leads us to option 3. Jess gave her that sharp, protective smile Elena trusted completely. We play his game by his rules. We lie low, we gather proof, and when we have an ironclad case, we hit him so hard and so fast, he will not know what happened. How long? Elena asked. 6 months, Jess answered. Maybe a year. It is enough time for you to protect your money. Enough time for me to dig up all his secrets. And just enough time for him to feel safe. To make mistakes. Let his guard down. Elena's mind flashed to Lucas and Lily, so tiny in the hospital, fighting to live. She remembered Daniel showing up 14 hours late, not worried, but angry that traffic made him miss a dinner reservation. A whole year of this. An entire year of pretending. 1 year of sleeping beside a man who only used her. A year of faking smiles while her soul grew cold. Could she really do that? Could she fake it for that long? Her eyes fell on the laptop. She saw the words, "No one will fight for her." And she thought, they are wrong. Option 3, Elena said, her voice firm. But I want him to hurt, Jess. I do not just want a victory. I want him to lose it all. His fortune, his name, his perfect reputation. And I want him to know it was me who did it, the quiet Mercer girl he thought was nobody. Jess grabbed her hand across the table. Then it is time to get to work. For the next 6 months, Elena lived a double life. By day, she was the perfect, supportive wife, smiling through all of Daniel's work events. She threw dinner parties for his business partners. She smiled politely when his mother, Margaret, insulted her cooking, her dress, or her family background. She learned to swallow her anger like a bitter pill, unpleasant but necessary. But at night, when Daniel was out with his mistress Victoria, Elena became an investigator. She tracked his secret companies. She recorded every dollar he moved to offshore accounts. She created spreadsheets, matching Daniel's calendar to hotel bills and Victoria's social media posts. She even dug up credit card bills he thought he had buried. And here is a little piece of advice that was a lifesaver. Instagram. When your husband claims he is working in Chicago, but his girlfriend is posting beach pictures from Miami, believe the time and stamps. Take a screenshot of everything. Then Elena found something else, something huge. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was Elena's OB/GYN during her pregnancy. She was a strong woman in her 60s, with a calming presence that came from having delivered more than 3,000 babies. She had seen it all, so when Elena called to get copies of her medical files, Dr. Mitchell immediately spotted something wrong. "Elena," she said slowly, "I am looking at your chart. Some of these notes, they are not in my handwriting." "What are you talking about?" "There is an entry here from the night the babies were born. It claims you refused care and were acting paranoid, that you fought with the nurses and showed signs of postpartum psychosis." "Elena, I did not write any of this. I was not even working that night. I was in Boston for my daughter's wedding." A chill ran down Elena's spine. "Someone forged my medical records. It looks that way, and they had to have access to the hospital's computer system. This is a very big deal, Elena. I have to tell the hospital board." "No," Elena said. "Please, not yet. Just give me a few days." The doctor was silent for a moment. "Whatever this is," she finally said, "you need to be very careful. This person has connections, and they will stop at nothing to destroy you. This was planned out very carefully." Elena thanked her and hung up the phone. She immediately called Jess. "He is laying a trap," Elena said, her voice trembling. "He faked my medical files. He is going to say I am unstable, that I am a threat to my own babies." "Then we have to speed things up," Jess said. "How much more do we need?" "1 more month, maybe 2. You might not have 2 months." Elena looked over at her twins, sleeping in their crib. Lucas's little fist was tucked under his chin. Lily was making tiny noises, lost in a baby dream. She remembered the doctor's words. Calculated, planned. This was not a divorce. It was a war, and Daniel, Bill, had been setting up the battlefield for years. No matter what, Elena whispered. He is not taking my children. Then, let us make sure he cannot, Jess replied. It is time. The very next morning, Elena marched into the courthouse and filed for divorce. The legal documents were 43 pages long. It had everything: the affair, the secret money, the fake medical files, even the emails where he called her the incubator. She gave the stack of papers to the clerk, her hands perfectly still. It was the first move in a war she had spent months preparing for, and for 6 wonderful hours, Elena felt like she had won. She went home, hugged her babies, and let herself dream of a life of freedom. Then Daniel arrived with the police, and Elena discovered that no matter how well you plan, your enemy might have been planning even longer. A police car pulled into her driveway at 6:47 p.m. She remembered the exact time because she was feeding Lily and saw the flashing lights outside the nursery window. Red and blue lights flashed in the dark, splashing across the perfect white walls of her home. Her first thought was an accident, that something terrible had happened to Daniel. But her second thought, the one that made her gut clench and her arms squeeze her daughter tighter, was that this was no accident. Daniel got out of the passenger side of the police car. He had on his most concerned face, the one he wore for the news cameras when he had to announce that he was firing people, or when his company got caught breaking the law. It was a perfect performance, and totally fake. 2 police officers walked behind him. Neither of them looked happy. Elena's hands started to shake as she passed Lily to the nanny. "Stay with them," she whispered. "Keep them in their room. Do not let them out of your sight, no matter what." She went to the front door to face them. "Elena," Daniel said, his voice full of phony concern, "I really did not want this, but you gave me no other option." "What is going on?" she asked. "Why are police officers at my home?" A younger officer, maybe 30 years old, stepped up. He looked like he wished he were anywhere else. "Ma'am, we have a court order for an emergency custody removal." The words floated in the air. Elena heard them, but they did not make any sense. "Emergency custody," she repeated, her voice thin. "For my kids?" The officer nodded. "We have paperwork here that says you might be a danger to your children." A judge, Judge Harrison's, signed the order just this afternoon. Judge Harrison. Elena knew that name. He was Daniel's golfing buddy. The same judge whose political campaign Daniel had paid for. The same judge who came to their house for Christmas. "This is crazy," Elena said. "I have never hurt my children. I would die for them. I almost did die for them." "Ma'am, I know this is hard," the officer said softly, but his hand was on his radio. "We have to follow the order. If you try to stop us, we will have to place you under arrest." Daniel moved in closer, speaking just loud enough for the police to hear him. "Elena's been having a really hard time since the babies were born. Postpartum depression. She has been acting strange, paranoid. I walked in at 3 a.m. and she was just standing over their cribs, staring. It terrified me. I begged her to get help, but she said the doctors were all plotting against her." "That is a lie," Elena screamed. "He is lying. I was up at 3 in the morning to feed them, because that is what mothers do." The second officer gave her a cold look. "Yes, Mrs. Shaw, that is what mothers do. We have medical records saying you refused hospital treatment and a sworn statement from a Dr. Whitman. He says you have postpartum psychosis with paranoid delusions. I've never seen a psychiatrist named Dr. Whitman. I have never even met the man." Daniel then pulled out his phone and showed it to the officers. "See? This is the evaluation. The doctor says Elena is a danger to herself and the children. He recommended we intervene immediately. Elena just stared at the document. It had her name, her birthday, her address, even her signature, but she had never signed this paper. She had never been evaluated. The fake hospital records, the phony psychiatric report, the judge who plays golf with her husband, it all clicked. This was an elaborate trap. "This is a fake," she said, her voice filled with desperation. "Someone faked my hospital records. My real doctor can confirm it, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She saw the changes herself. Just give me a little time to prove it. 24 hours is all I am asking for." The officer just shook his head. "Ma'am, that is for a court to decide. Right now we have a valid court order, and we have to follow it." Behind her, one of the babies began to cry. It was Lily. She always knew when her mother was afraid. "Please," Elena whispered, her voice cracking. The word came out broken. "Please don't do this. They are just 3 months old. They're still nursing. They need their mother." For a brief second, she saw something change in the young officer's eyes, a flicker of doubt, of sympathy, a sign that he knew something was deeply wrong here. His hand moved from his radio, and his shoulders relaxed. Then Daniel spoke again. "Officers, I am truly worried about her safety. Can we please just do this quickly before she gets any more upset? I do not want her to hurt herself." The moment was over. The officer's face hardened, becoming professional and distant again. "Ma'am, you need to step aside. We're taking the children now." What happened in the next few moments would haunt Elena for the rest of her days. The officers walked upstairs, their boots loud on the marble staircase, the same one where she dreamed of her children taking their first steps. The nanny, who was crying, handed over Lucas first. He was wrapped in a blue blanket Elena's mother had made before she passed away. Then came Lily. Lily was screaming, reaching out for her mother with tiny, desperate hands. Elena screamed back. She begged. She tried to push past them. She had to get to her babies. One of the officers held her back, not roughly, but with a firm, unmovable grip. "Ma'am, please do not make this any harder than it needs to be." Harder? She watched as her children were carried out of their nursery, down the stairs, and through the same front door she had walked through as a bride 4 years earlier. Lucas was wailing now, too. That piercing newborn cry that sounds like the world is ending, a sound mothers are wired to never ignore. And Elena couldn't get to him. She couldn't hold him. She could only stand there and watch. "You will regret this," she screamed at Daniel. "I swear to God, you are going to regret this. They are my children. Mine." Daniel just shook his head sadly, turning to the officers with a pained expression. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. The paranoid threats, the unstable behavior. Thank you for getting the children to a safe place. I will make sure she gets the help she needs." The car doors slammed. The engine roared to life. The lights, blue and red, vanished down the long driveway. Elena stood in the doorway of her now empty house, her arms aching for the children, who were gone. "You have to understand. They took my children from my home while I screamed until my voice was gone." The officers just looked at me with pity, as if I was insane, as if I was the danger. And Daniel just stood there with his concerned look, and they all believed him. That's how convincing he was. That's how long he had planned all this. He didn't just want the kids. He wanted to completely erase me. And for 72 hours, I was sure he had won. The next 3 days were a complete nightmare. Elena was served with a restraining order. She could not come within 500 feet of her own home. Her bank accounts were frozen because of suspicious activity she knew nothing about. Her credit cards were all canceled. Her cell phone service was cut. In just 3 days, she went from a wealthy woman to being homeless and broke. Jess took her in, of course, giving her the pull-out couch in her tiny city apartment. She made sure Elena ate and held her as she cried all through the night. "We will fix this," Jess promised. "This fight is not over." But Elena barely heard her. All she could hear were Lucas's cries. All she could see was Lily reaching for her. She constantly checked the new phone Jess bought, desperate for a text from the nanny, for any news at all. Nothing. She didn't know if they were eating, if they were sleeping, or if anyone was there to hold them when they cried. She didn't even know if they would remember the sound of her voice. On the fourth day, Elena ran out of tears. On the fifth day, she began to think. On the sixth day, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved months before. It rang twice. Hello? The voice on the other end was deep and rough. Mr. Callahan? Elena asked. My name is Elena Shaw. We met at a pediatrician's office a while back. You were there with your niece. You gave me your card and told me if I ever needed any help, with anything at all, I should give you a call. There was a long silence on the line. I remember you, Roman Callahan said slowly. You are Daniel Shaw's wife. I was Daniel Shaw's wife. Now I am just the woman he is trying to destroy. He took my children, Mr. Callahan. He faked evidence to make it look like I was crazy. He has judges and police officers on his payroll. And I think she paused to steady her voice. I think you might be the only other person in this city who hates him enough to help me. Another pause. Elena could almost hear him thinking, weighing his options. Where are you? Roman finally asked. Manhattan. I am staying with a friend. Stay put. Do not go anywhere and do not talk to anyone else. I will come to you. Then he hung up. Elena lowered the phone and looked at Jess, who had overheard everything. Are you sure about this? Jess asked. Roman Callahan is not exactly a charity case. He is a shark, Elena, just like your husband, maybe even worse. Those two have been trying to ruin each other for years. Maybe, Elena said, staring out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, her babies were missing her. But right now, a shark is exactly what I need. Roman Callahan showed up at Jess's apartment at 8 o'clock that night. He was not at all what Elena had been expecting. She had seen his pictures in the news. Of course, the media loved the billionaire playboy who raced motorcycles and dated famous models. But the man who walked in looked nothing like that. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had seen real work at some point. His dark hair was starting to gray at the sides. His face looked tired and weathered, and he had a look in his eyes that was almost like grief. He wasn't wearing a designer suit, just jeans and a simple flannel shirt, and he was holding a baby. Elena stared. The baby was about 2 years old, a little girl with wild curly hair and her father's gray eyes. She was clinging to Roman's neck, looking at Elena with suspicion. Sorry, Roman said, his voice even rougher than on the phone. This is my daughter, Grace. I do not leave her with strangers. It was such a strange thing to say that Elena didn't know what to do. She just stepped aside to let them both inside. You mentioned your wife, Elena said carefully, as Roman sat down with Grace still clinging to him. At the doctor's office, you said she passed away from cancer. Roman's face tensed up. 3 years ago, a brain tumor. Grace was only 6 months old when Claire died. I am so very sorry. Do not be... Roman's voice was flat. It is what it is now. Tell me what Daniel did to you. So, Elena told him everything. The unanswered phone calls, the emergency C-section, the affair, the hidden bank accounts, the fake medical records, and the police taking her babies. Roman listened to every word without saying anything. His expression did not change, but Elena could see his jaw clenching tighter and tighter as she spoke. When she finally finished, the room was silent. At last, Roman spoke. He tried to ruin you, both in public and for good. That is his move. I have seen him do it to his business rivals. I just never thought he would do it to his own wife. He did it because I fought him, Elena said. I filed for divorce. I honestly thought I had evidence to win this fight. You do have plenty of evidence, Roman told her. But evidence means nothing when the judges are paid off and the whole system is corrupt. Daniel has spent 20 years building this kind of protection for himself. Whenever I tried to go after him in business, every lawsuit would just disappear. Every single witness would change their story. Then how can we possibly beat him? Roman looked at her, really studied her, as if he was trying to measure her strength. We do not just fight him, Roman said. We are going to take him apart, piece by piece. We find every person he has ever hurt, every single person he has ever betrayed, and we turn them all against him. That could take months. It will take months. Roman shifted Grace to his other arm. The little girl was now fast asleep on his shoulder. Are you ready to do what is necessary? Ilona thought about Lucas and Lily, about the sounds of their cries as the officers carried them away. I am willing to do whatever it takes. Roman nodded. Then here is what I know. Daniel has enemies everywhere, including partners in business. He has cheated, and he killed his employees. But the people he hurt aren't the key, it's the ones still close to him. Victoria, Elena said. His mistress, maybe. But Victoria is a social climber. She'll be loyal only as long as Daniel is on top. We need someone with real access, someone who knows where the bodies are buried. There is one person, Elena said slowly. She paused. It was a terrible, dangerous idea, but she was desperate. His mother, Elena said. Margaret. She has been pulling Daniel's strings for years. I have emails that prove she set up the affair, that she was picking my replacement before we were even married. But I think it's even worse than that. How so? Elena showed him a file on her phone she'd found just before Daniel took the kids. It was a transaction record from one of Daniel's accounts, but the activity was strange. Look at these transfers, she said, handing the phone to Roman. Every month, a huge amount of money goes from Shaw Industries to Daniel's offshore account. But then within 48 hours, most of it moves again to another account I can't track. Roman stared at the screen. His eyes narrowed. This doesn't seem like Daniel. He collects money. He doesn't just give it away. Unless he has no idea it's happening, Elena said. You think his mother is stealing from him? I think his mother has been stealing from him for years. And if we can prove that, we can turn Daniel against the one person he has always trusted completely. Roman looked up from the phone, and his expression had changed. He almost looked at her with respect. You really were an accountant, he said. A forensic accountant, Elena corrected him. We find the things people try to hide, Roman smiled. It was a weary smile, but it was real. All right, Elena Shaw, we have a lot of work ahead of us. But first, we need to get you in front of a judge who isn't in Daniel's pocket. I know someone. A retired family court judge named Vivian Ashford. She can't be bought. How do you know her? Roman's smile vanished, because she's the one who handled my custody case after Claire died. My in-laws tried to take Grace away from me. They claimed I was too unstable to raise my child by myself. Vivian saw straight through their lies. She saved my daughter. Then you have to call her, Elena said. Please. Roman nodded. He took out his phone with his free hand, while his other arm still held his sleeping daughter. Dr. Ashford, Roman said into the phone. I have someone that you need to meet. A woman whose children were taken by a man who bought the entire system. Elena couldn't hear the reply, but she saw Roman's face relax just a little. Tomorrow morning? He said. 9 o'clock. We'll be there. He hung up and looked at Elena. Get some rest, he told her. Tomorrow we start the real fight. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena felt something besides despair. She actually felt hope. She really should have known that it wouldn't last. The meeting with Dr. Vivian Ashford changed absolutely everything. Vivian was 73 years old, sharp as a tack, and not at all impressed by money or influence. She'd been a family court judge for 32 years before she retired. She had seen every dirty trick in the book, and she saw right through Daniel's schemes. This custody order is complete garbage, Vivian said, laying the papers out on her kitchen table. Judge Harrison signed this based on fake medical records, and a report from a doctor who was disciplined twice for falsifying documents. I can get this thrown out in 72 hours. Elena just stared at her. 72 hours? 48, if I make a few calls. Vivian gave a grim smile. Harrison and I go way back. He knows that I know things that could end his entire career. But what about Daniel? He's got money, connections. So do I, Vivian said. I spent 3 decades building a network of honest judges, honest lawyers, and honest social workers. Not all of them bow down to money, Elena. Some of us still actually believe in justice. 3 days later, Elena walked into family court with Jess on one side and Roman on the other. They challenged the emergency custody order, exposed the fake medical records, and Dr. Okonkwo testified that her notes were changed without her knowing. Judge Harrison, faced with clear proof of his corruption, removed himself from the case. A new judge was assigned, an older woman by the name of Patricia Henley. She had never accepted a single penny from Daniel Shaw. At the temporary custody hearing, Jess laid out everything: the affair, the secret accounts, the forged records, the whole conspiracy. Daniel's lawyers were in a panic. They objected, they tried to stall, they begged for more time. Judge Henley shut down every single one of their motions. Based on the evidence I've seen, the judge announced, I am changing the custody agreement effective immediately. Elena Shaw is granted temporary primary custody of her children, Lucas and Lily Shaw. Daniel Shaw is granted supervised visitation, pending a full investigation. Elena just burst into tears. Supervised visits for Daniel meant her children were finally coming home. The reunion took place that afternoon. Elena held Lucas first. He felt so much bigger than she remembered, even though it had only been 3 weeks. He looked at her, confused at first. Then he slowly melted into her arms. Then Lily, her sweet little Lily, reached out for her mother before the social worker could even hand her over. Elena held them both close. She buried her face in their hair and just breathed them in. And she just cried. "Mommy's here," she whispered to them. "Mommy is never, ever leaving you again." Roman watched from across the room. His own daughter, Grace, was with her nanny, but Elena could see him thinking about her, thinking about how close he came to losing her too. "You did it," Jess said, giving Elena's shoulder a squeeze. "You actually did it, and for one single perfect moment." Elena really believed it was all over. She should have known better. The news story broke 3 days later. Elena was at Roman's house planning their next move against Daniel's company when Jess called, her voice tight with rage. "Turn on the news," Jess said. "Channel 7, right now." Elena fumbled for the remote. A news anchor was speaking with that breathless excitement that meant a huge story. Breaking news in the Shaw Industries scandal. A whistleblower has just come forward with evidence that Roman Kalinowski, the billionaire CEO of Kalinowski Global, allegedly forged documents to frame his business rival, Daniel Shaw. According to the leaked files, Kalinowski and Shaw's estranged wife, Elena, manipulated financial records as part of a coordinated revenge plot. Elena felt all the blood rush from her face. The screen showed documents, spreadsheets, and emails, all of them fake, but they were designed to look like she and Roman had made up the evidence about the offshore account. Daniel was fighting back, and he was winning. The media attack was brutal and non-stop. Within 24 hours, Elena's name was everywhere, not as a victim, but as the villain. "Scorned wife teams up with husband's rival," one headline read. "Fake documents expose custody fraud," screamed another. Jess's phone would not stop ringing. Her law firm was being pressured to drop Elena as a client. The other partners were getting nervous about the bad press, about their reputation. "I am not dropping you," Jess said with force. "They will have to fire me before I'd ever abandon you." But even as she said it, Elena could see the deep strain on her friend's face. This was costing Jess everything, and it was only going to get worse. The second punch landed the very next morning. Elena was served with a new set of papers, an emergency motion to reverse the custody agreement. Daniel's lawyers were now arguing that the media storm proved Elena was waging a campaign of public harassment and that she was unstable and dangerous. The same Judge Henley who had helped her before now looked at the media circus, and she hesitated. "Mrs. Shaw," the judge said very carefully, "I have serious concerns about the environment these children are in. The public spectacle of this fight is not in their best interest." "Your Honor," Jess pleaded, "the media coverage is because my client's husband leaked fake documents to the press. She is the victim here, not the attacker, but the damage had been done." Judge Henley was facing public pressure and worried about her own reputation, so she changed her previous order. Custody was reversed. Again, Elena watched as the social workers took Lucas and Lily for a second time. Lily reached for her, crying. Elena reached back. She could smell her daughter's hair, but she couldn't touch her. The third blow landed that same afternoon. Elena was still at Jess's apartment, in total shock, when her phone rang. It was Roman. "Elena," Roman said, and his voice sounded wrong, broken in a way she'd never heard. They took Grace. What? Child Protective Services. Someone called in an anonymous complaint. They said my home was unsafe, that I was neglecting her. Roman's voice cracked. "She is all I have left of Claire. She is my entire world." Elena collapsed into a chair. The room was spinning. Daniel wasn't just after her anymore. He was going after everyone who helped her, burning their lives to the ground to make sure she was completely alone. In just 72 hours, she had lost custody again. Her reputation was destroyed, and the only friend she had left had just lost his child too. Daniel wasn't trying to win. He was trying to destroy everyone she cared about. And then she realized something else. Something that had been bothering her for weeks. This was not a divorce. This was a war. And she had been fighting it like it was a simple argument. It was time to start fighting for her life. The days after her world fell apart were the darkest of Elena's entire life. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She did nothing but stare at photos of Lucas and Lily. She just watched videos of their first smiles and listened to recordings of their little voices. Jess made her shower, forced her to drink water, and sat with her through the worst of the panic attacks. "You have to eat," Jess said, sliding a bowl of soup toward her. "I cannot," Elena whispered. "I cannot do anything. What is the point? The point is your babies need their mother alive and fighting. Dying is not an option. Winning is. But we lost." "We lost one battle," Jess said, gripping her hand. "We have not lost the war." On the 5th day, Roman showed up at Jess's door. He looked worse than Elena, felt unshaven, with hollow eyes, but under all that exhaustion, something else was burning, something dangerous. "I found something," Roman said, holding a thick folder. Daniel made a mistake. Elena looked up. It was the first time in days she'd felt anything besides despair. What kind of a mistake? Roman spread the documents out on the small kitchen table. "I've been tracking Daniel's finances for years," he explained, always looking for weak spots. "He's careful, almost paranoid, but everybody slips up." He pointed to a set of wire transfers. "Look at this pattern. Every month, money moves from Shaw Industries to an offshore account. In Daniel's name. We already knew that part. But look at what happens next. Within 48 hours, most of that money moves again to a totally different account, one registered to a shell company in Switzerland." Elena leaned in closer. "I saw that too. I just could not trace where it went." "I can," Roman's voice was grim. "The shell company is called Ashford Holdings. It's owned by a trust, and the trustee is Margaret Shaw." Elena's breath hitched. "She's stealing from him." "She has been for years," Roman confirmed. "Almost $200 million in total. Daniel thinks he is rich. His mother has been bleeding him dry. But why? Control, Roman said simply. Margaret does not want Daniel to succeed. She wants him to need her. As long as he believes the company is fragile, he has to keep fighting, keep working, and keep doing whatever she tells him to. It was a special kind of cruelty. Margaret had built a whole kingdom using her own son as a pawn who had no idea. But that was not the only thing I found. There is more, Roman continued. He pulled out another document. This is a letter I found in my own company's files from 8 years ago. Elena took the paper. It was a legal notice, the type that companies send to each other during business deals. But one single paragraph was highlighted. She read it out loud. Per our agreement, Dr. Marcus Whitman will provide evaluations as needed for custody proceedings. All fees are to be directed through Ashford Holdings. Dr. Whitman, Elena repeated. That's the psychiatrist who wrote my evaluation, the one who said I was psychotic. The very same one, Roman confirmed. Margaret has been using him for years. Whenever someone threatens her position, she pays Whitman to declare them mentally unstable. This is unbelievable, Jess breathed. This connects Margaret directly to the fraud. If we can prove she paid him to fake your evaluation, the whole house of cards will come down, Elena finished. For the first time in days, she felt something stirring inside of her. It was not hope, not really. It was something darker, more focused. We need more, Elena said. We have to get inside Margaret's records, her personal files, the things she keeps locked away. That is going to be tough, Jess said. She's paranoid. Everything will be locked down tight. Not everything, Elena said slowly, as a terrible idea started to form. A brilliant, terrible idea. There is one person who has access to her things. One person Margaret trusts. Who is it? Roman asked.
Victoria Lane,
Elena said.
Daniel's mistress.
She has been working as his executive assistant for 3 years. She can get to everything. Roman frowned. Victoria is loyal to Daniel. Why would she ever help us? Because Daniel is not loyal to Victoria. Elena pulled up her phone, showing them the email she had found months ago. The one between Daniel and Margaret planning to replace Victoria. Look at this, Elena said. This is from 6 months ago. Daniel is already planning to trade Victoria in for someone younger, the Henderson girl. She is 24 years old with better connections. Jess let out a low whistle, and Victoria does not know. Victoria thinks she is going to be the next Mrs. Shaw. She has no clue she is just another stepping stone for him. Roman nodded slowly. So we tell her, we show her the proof, and then we give her a choice. Exactly, Elena said. She can help us take down Daniel and walk away with a clean slate, or she can wait for Daniel to throw her out and end up with absolutely nothing. It's risky, Jess warned. If Victoria runs straight to Daniel, then we are no worse off than we are right now, Elena said. We have already lost everything. This is our last shot. Roman looked at her, really looked at her, the same way he did that first night in Jess's apartment. You have changed, he said quietly. I had to, Elena replied. The woman I was before, she let all this happen. She let people walk all over her. She trusted all the wrong people and ignored every single warning sign. That woman is gone. Good, Roman said, because the woman you are becoming might actually win this thing. That night, Elena did not sleep. But this time it was not despair that kept her awake. It was planning. For her entire marriage, she had been passive, just following Daniel's lead and accepting what he decided. She used to believe that love meant giving in. Not anymore. She started making lists. People who could help, evidence they still needed, and all of Daniel's weaknesses. By morning, she had a complete plan. It would take perfect timing, total secrecy, and more courage than she ever thought she had. But she was done being a victim. It was time to be the hero of her own story. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place where a salad is $40, and the waiters look right past you if you are not wearing designer clothes. Elena, chose it for a reason. Victoria Lane would feel comfortable here, and she would not suspect a thing. Elena had dressed carefully, not too flashy, but professional. She wanted Victoria to see her as an equal, not as a rival. She got there first, ordered sparkling water, and waited. Victoria walked in at exactly 12:30, in a white blouse and red lipstick, her blonde hair styled perfectly. She moved through the restaurant like she owned it, full of confidence and poise. Then she saw Elena, and her confidence vanished. "You," Victoria said, stopping at the table. "What is this?" "Please, sit down," Elena said calmly. "I promise you this will be worth your time. If Daniel finds out that I met with you, Daniel will not find out unless you tell him, and if you do, you will lose far more than I will." Something in Elena's voice made Victoria hesitate. She looked around the restaurant, then slowly sat down. "I am not here to threaten you," Elena continued. "I am here to help you." Victoria laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Help me. You hate me. I should hate you. But right now, I need you. And you need me, even if you do not know it yet." Elena took out her phone and put it on the table between them. 6 months ago, I found emails between Daniel and his mother. They were planning to replace me before we even got married. Margaret chose you. She thought you were ambitious but easy to control. Better family than me. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Is that supposed to bother me? I already know Margaret likes me. I am sure she told you that, Elena said. But did she tell you about the Henderson girl? The what? Elena swiped to the next email and turned her phone so Victoria could read it. This is from 3 months ago. Daniel to Margaret. Victoria has served her purpose. Once the divorce is done, I will find someone younger. She is hitting 30 and getting too clingy. Victoria's face turned white. And this one, Elena continued, swiping again. Margaret's reply. I have candidates. The Henderson girl is only 24 and has much better connections. She's less emotional, too. Victoria snatched the phone, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the emails. Her lips moved without a sound as she read. This is fake, Victoria whispered. You know it is not. He told me he loved me. Victoria's voice cracked. He said we were the future. He told me that too. For 8 years, Elena kept her voice gentle but firm. I am not here to be your friend, Victoria. I am here because you have access to information that I need, and you have 2 choices. Victoria looked up, her mascara beginning to smudge. You can help me destroy Daniel before he destroys you, Elena said. Or you can wait for him to replace you, just like he replaced me. And when that happens, you will not get a big settlement. You will not even get a goodbye. You will get nothing. How do I know you will not just betray me too? Because I need you as a witness. Elena leaned forward. Help me take down Daniel and Margaret, and I will make sure you walk away with no problems. I have a lawyer, a very good one. She can get you immunity in exchange for your testimony. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The restaurant buzzed around them, totally unaware of the high-stakes deal being made at table 7. What do you need? Victoria finally asked. Everything, Elena said. Start with the real files, the ones Margaret keeps inside her private safe. That evening, Victoria delivered. The documents she brought were explosive. Financial records showing Margaret's years of theft from Shaw Industries, emails proving she orchestrated the affair, contracts with Dr. Whitman for fake psychiatric evaluations. And one more thing. A small detail that changed absolutely everything. There is a clause in the Shaw Industries charter, Roman said, reading through the papers. If the majority shareholder is convicted of fraud, their shares automatically go into a trust controlled by the company. Meaning what? Elena asked. It means if we convict Margaret, Daniel loses everything. Not just his reputation, but his actual ownership. And who controls the trust? Roman looked up, his eyes shining. The board of directors, he said. a board I have been quietly building friendships with for 3 years. For the first time, Elena let herself think they could actually win. And in the next 2 weeks, the dominoes started to fall. First, Vivian Ashford confronted her son in public at a legal conference. Judge Harrison was suspended while they investigated him for corruption. Then, the hospital's security video surfaced, showing Margaret's assistant using Dr. Okonkwo's computer. The medical records scam was exposed, and Dr. Whitman lost his license. Then Roman filed an official whistleblower complaint with the SEC, not from Elena, but from himself using his own investigation. The feds came for Margaret first. Elena watched the arrest live on TV. Margaret Shaw, the head of the Shaw family business empire, was led from her home in handcuffs. She looked furious and confused, like she could not believe this was happening to someone like her. Daniel was next. His accounts were frozen, his board members wouldn't take his calls, and his lawyer started suggesting plea deals. Through it all, Elena just waited. She wanted more than a simple victory. She wanted Daniel to know that she did this. She wanted him to understand the woman he'd called a casserole maker had destroyed his entire world. Her chance came 3 weeks later at the Shaw Industries annual charity gala. A black tie event with 500 people, including every major business leader in New York. Daniel would be there, trying to maintain the illusion of power even as his life fell apart. And Elena would be there, too, with the final nail for his coffin. The gala took place at the Metropolitan Club, one of Manhattan's oldest and most elite venues. Crystal chandeliers threw a warm light on marble floors as waiters in white gloves offered champagne. The city's elite mixed and mingled in designer gowns and perfectly fitted tuxedos. Daniel Shaw stood by the main entrance, shaking hands and smiling, pretending that everything was totally fine. He had lost 15 pounds in the last month. His suit was a little loose, and his eyes looked empty, but he was still putting on a performance. Until Elena walked in. She wore a deep red gown she had bought with money from her new job. Roman offered to pay, but she said no. This night was going to be hers alone. Jess was by her side. Victoria lingered near the back. Victoria was ready to vanish if needed, and Roman was already inside, talking quietly with the board chairman. The entire room noticed Elena the moment she came in. Whispers spread through the crowd. Everyone knew the story, the scorned wife, the ugly custody battle, the accusations from both sides. What they did not know was why she was here. Daniel saw her from across the room and his jaw went tight. "Elena," he said, walking toward her, his anger barely under control. "What do you think you are doing here?" "I was invited," Elena said calmly, "by the board. The board does not have the authority to—" "Actually, we do, Mr. Shaw," the chairman interrupted, appearing next to Daniel. "We need you at the front. We have an announcement to make." Daniel's confusion was almost funny. He looked back and forth between Elena and the chairman, trying to process what he was missing. For once in his life, he did not see the trap closing in on him. The room became quiet as the chairman took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I know there have been many rumors about Shaw Industries. I'm here to address them." The screens around the room flashed to life. Daniel's face appeared beside SEC investigation files and Margaret's arrest photo. "Over the past month," the chairman continued, "we have uncovered systematic fraud at the highest levels of this company. Margaret Shaw has been arrested for stealing over $200 million. Furthermore, CSO Daniel Shaw is under investigation for tax fraud, money laundering, and faking legal documents." Gasps went through the room. Daniel stepped forward. "This is a coup. These are lies. I built this company." "You built nothing," Roman said, stepping out of the crowd. His voice was steady and cold. "I've been buying Shaw Industries debt for 18 months. As of this morning, I am the majority creditor, and I am calling in the loans." "You can't do this," Daniel sputtered. "I already have," Roman said, handing a document to the chairman. "Shaw Industries is now controlled by a new committee." "You're out, Daniel." Daniel whipped around to face Elena, his face red with rage. "This was you," he hissed. "You did this." Elena stepped forward. The room was silent, watching. "You did not think I would fight back?" Elena said, her voice clear and calm. "You thought I was just a stepping stone, a casserole maker, someone too stupid to understand your plans." She moved closer, until she stood right in front of him. "You ignored my calls when I was dying. You tied children from my arms. You tried to ruin everyone who helped me. You thought you'd already won." Her voice dropped low, meant only for him. "You forgot I was an accountant, Daniel. And accountants always find the missing money." The ballroom doors swung open, and 2 FBI agents walked in. Daniel Shaw, one of them, said, "You are under arrest for tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit custody interference." "You cannot do this," Daniel said again, but his voice was weak and broken now. The agents cuffed him. Cameras flashed. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Daniel Shaw was led out of his own party in handcuffs. Elena watched him leave. She did not feel joy or victory, just a deep, exhausted relief. It was over. The next morning, Elena picked up her children. Lucas was bigger. He had started to say simple words. When he saw Elena, his whole face lit up. "Mama," he said. Elena cried. She could not help herself. Lily was quieter. She looked at Elena's face for a long time, as if to make sure this was really happening. Then she reached up and touched her cheek. Elena held them both for a long, long time. She breathed them in, memorizing the feeling of their small bodies against hers. Jess was there. Roman was there with Grace. Even Victoria had come, standing awkwardly by the wall. "Thank you," Elena said to all of them. "I could not have done this alone." "That's the point," Jess said. "You were never supposed to do it alone." Roman crouched down so Grace could wave to Lucas and Lily. "What happens now?" Roman asked. Elena looked at her children, at the friends who were now her family, at the future that no longer felt like a cage. "Now," Elena said, "we start over, for real this time." A year later, the sun was warm on the kitchen windows as Elena made breakfast for her twins. Lucas was 3 now, chattering about trucks and dinosaurs and the dog he wanted. But he was too young to have one. Lily was more quiet, but she had started to draw, filling page after page with colorful swirls that she gave to Elena like precious gifts. The house was modest compared to the Greenwich mansion, a comfortable home in Westchester, with a backyard big enough for a swing set. Elena had bought it with the money from her new company, Mercer Forensic Consulting. She founded it 6 months after the trial ended. The business was simple. She helped women in divorces find money their husbands were trying to hide. The women who came to her were often desperate, scared, and alone. Elena understood. She had been all of those things. "You saved me," one client told her. "I thought there was no way out." "There is always a way out," Elena replied. "But sometimes you need help finding it." The doorbell rang. Roman stood on the porch holding Grace's hand. She was 4 now and talked constantly, just like Lucas. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's curly hair. "Morning," Roman said. Grace wanted to play with the twins before school. Elena smiled. "Come on in. The coffee is ready." They had settled into a simple routine over the past year. It was not romantic, not really, but something deeper, something that felt like family. Roman helped Elena with childcare when she had late meetings. Elena helped Roman with the problems of being a single father. They celebrated holidays together, complained about school drop-off lines together, and supported each other through the tough days. If it ever became something more than that, neither of them was in a rush. There was time now, time to heal, and time to grow, and time to figure out what they really wanted. "Any word from the prosecutor?" Roman asked as Elena poured coffee. "Final sentencing is next month." Elena handed him a mug. Daniel is looking at 8 to 12 years, and Margaret is already serving 15. She is appealing, of course, but Victoria's testimony was crushing. Victoria had been given immunity in exchange for her complete cooperation. She testified for 3 full days, revealing everything she knew about Margaret's schemes and Daniel's role in them. The jury was only out for 4 hours. Elena still felt conflicted about Victoria. She was grateful, yes, but forgiving her was another story. Some wounds are just slow to heal. "What about the kids?" Roman asked gently. "Has Daniel made any attempt to contact them?" "His lawyer sent a letter," Elena confessed, "asking to see them after he gets out. I haven't made a decision yet." She gazed out the window where Lucas and Lily were playing with Grace. They don't remember him. I mean, not really. Lucas was just 3 months old when it all went down. Lily was even younger. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe, Roman agreed softly. Elena let out a long sigh. But one day they're going to have questions. They will want to know about their father. And you'll just tell them the truth. Parts of it. Enough of it, Elena said, turning back to Roman. I don't want them to grow up hating him. That's just too much baggage to carry. Roman paused for a moment, then reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. You are a good mom, he told her. Much better than you think you are. Elena smiled, a real one, the kind that was impossible a year ago. I'm trying, she said. That is all any of us can ever do. That afternoon, after Roman and Grace left and the twins were down for their nap, Elena was in her office reviewing files. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jess. Happy anniversary. 1 year since you brought down an empire. How's it feel? Elena quickly typed back. Like I can finally breathe again. Jess replied with a string of party emojis. Dinner on Friday? I have so many stories about my latest case. Jess had also opened her own firm, Torres Family Law. She handled high-conflict custody battles, using what she learned from Elena's terrible ordeal. She was helping other women fight their way through the legal system. Definitely, Elena typed back. The usual spot? Perfect. You bring the wine. Elena put her phone down and glanced around her office. One wall was covered in photos of the twins. Her degrees hung on another. On her desk sat a small plaque from Jess that simply said, Still standing. A year ago, she was sleeping on a couch. Her babies had been taken, and her reputation was in ruins. She had lost it all. Now, she ran a company helping women avoid her fate. She's had her children back, and friends who were like family. She had a life she had built from scratch, with her own 2 hands. And she had learned a vital lesson. You don't need a man to rescue you, but you definitely need a team. Find your people, fight like hell, and you never, ever give up. Elena smiled and got back to her work. The afternoon sun poured through the window. Out in the yard, a cardinal landed on the fence and started to sing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Elena truly felt at peace. The story really should have ended right there, but life rarely goes according to plan. 3 weeks later, Elena was in her office when her assistant buzzed her. You have a new client here, she said. She's asking for a consultation. Says it's an emergency. Elena checked her schedule. She did have an opening. Go ahead and send her in. The woman who walked through the door wasn't what Elena had expected at all. She looked to be about 35, elegantly dressed, with dark hair and very tired eyes. She moved cautiously, like someone who had been badly hurt and was still healing. Mrs. Mercer, the woman began, thank you so much for seeing me. Please have a seat, Elena said, pointing to a chair. How can I help? The woman sat down, folding her hands in her lap. The light glinted off her wedding ring. My name is Claire, she said. My name is Claire Kalinowski. Elena felt her entire body go cold. Claire Kalinowski. That was Roman's wife. The wife who had died from cancer 3 years ago. The woman whose death had shattered Roman's world and left Grace without a mother. But here was Claire, sitting right across the desk from her, Very, very much alive. I know this must be a shock, Claire said softly. Everyone thinks I died. Roman is certain I'm dead. He even held a funeral for me. He grieved for me, and he moved on. How is this possible? Elena finally managed to ask. Claire took a shaky breath. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor. They told me it was terminal 6 months, tops. But then, a federal agent got in touch with me. Roman's company was being investigated for money laundering, from old deals made before we even met. The agent gave me 2 choices: testify against my husband and enter witness protection, or say no and watch the feds ruin our lives. Elena just stared at her. I thought I was dying no matter what. Claire said, I truly thought I was protecting Roman and Grace by just disappearing. So I took the deal. I gave my testimony, they faked my death, and I went into witness protection. But obviously, you didn't die. No, somehow the treatment actually worked. The cancer went into remission. But by that point, I was legally dead. Roman had already mourned me. Grace had forgotten me. I convinced myself they were just better off. So what made you come back now? Because Roman is in love with you, Claire said, plain and simple. I've been watching from afar, keeping up with him. I saw how he helped you, and I see how close you two are now. And I realize that he deserves to know the truth. And so do you. Elena sank back into her chair, her head spinning. Roman's wife was alive. The woman he mourned for 3 long years was in her office asking for help. What is it you want me to do? Elena asked. I want you to be the one to tell him, Claire said. I know it should be me, but I can't just walk up to his door. He'll think he's gone crazy. The news has to come from someone that he trusts. Elena looked at the woman sitting in front of her. She could see the fear in Claire's eyes, but also hope, and a desperate need to get her old life back. She thought of Roman and of Grace, and the fragile happiness they had all managed to build this past year. She thought about how this news would completely shatter their world. And then she made up her mind. I will tell him, Elena said, but after that, you need to explain everything. You owe him that much. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Elena glanced at her calendar, at the pictures of her kids, and at the life she had rebuilt from total ruin. She had thought her story was finally over. She had thought she'd found some peace, but she really should have known better. When you get involved with billionaires, the drama never really ends. There's always one more secret, one more plot twist, another chapter just waiting to be written. Elena picked up her phone and dialed Roman's number. The next part of her story was just beginning. So now I have to ask you, what would you do in her shoes? Would you have trusted Roman, the man your husband despised? Would you have fought back when everyone else believed the lies? Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think, because I read all of them. And I know some of you have gone through something similar. If this story made you think of someone you care about, a sister, a friend, anyone, please share this video with them. You truly never know whose life you might change. And if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories. We tell stories about women who get knocked down, but absolutely refuse to stay there. Remember this, you are so much stronger than you think. Your story is not over. Until next time, stay strong.